Okay.
Okay. Great. Welcome to the Bladtcast. Christian Blatt here, joined for those watching on YouTube. You are seeing me joined by author Kimberla Lawson Roby. Her latest book is The Woman God Created You to Be: Finding Success Through Faith, Spirituality, Personality, and Professionally. I've already gotten it wrong.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, Kimberla. Sorry.
Thank you so much for having me.
Between looking back and forth at the camera and reading it, I'm like, personally.
Yes.
So personally, yeah. So I definitely want to talk to you about the book. First of all, I appreciate you talking to me. You know, right before we hit record, we talked about just sort of how strange it is to do things this way. And yet in the course of 3 weeks, this is kind of how we do everything, you know?
Yes.
We've been
Yes.
talking to our family this way. My kids are both small, but you see everyone else, you know, who, with older kids, they're having like classrooms that way. And
Yes.
look, it's just as terrible and as scary as this time is. Just imagine the technology 10 or 20 years ago, we would feel so much more isolated. So,
And that's the thing. That's what, my husband and my friends and I have been talking about. What would we have done
yeah,
before this day and age of technology and social media? And, of course, what we're on now, Zoom
yeah,
and YouTube. And, so, thankfully we do have at least this. This is a very different, it's
yeah.
a new normal. And, but it's something that I think we're, gradually getting used to because we have to do it. So.
Right. You know, when we see sort of, not particularly my favorite kind of entertainment, but sort of the, apocalyptic end of the world stuff, when people are afraid to go outside, usually their cell phones and everything doesn't work just as well. So we're certainly better off than, we're prepared for, in zombie movies and things like that.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
So I'm looking forward to talking about the book. I did want to talk a little bit about that current situation. And I'm just sort of wondering, obviously it's a spiritual book. It's a faith-based topic. So I'm just sort of wondering what you would say, just personally, if, maybe one of your friends asked you this question, that they're finding this situation so challenging and they're finding it to maybe putting some pressure on their relationship with God. What would you say to someone who would ask that?
So, that's the thing, obviously, my faith is what continues to sustain me through all of this. And, but still being human, I've still had my moments over this last 3 or 4 weeks where I felt anxiety and I felt worry. And you start thinking about, oh my gosh, I never thought I would see anything like this in my lifetime. And, what's going to happen to myself or my husband or, our family members or our friends. And then you start projecting to what about even after this is over, when the dust settles, so to speak. And so for me, it is still prayer. I still, no matter what, I have to continue praying every day. I have to still depend on my faith and keep it strong. And what I related to most, and this is what I've had to go back to, little did I ever know that the most devastating time in my life, where I didn't think I could get through it, didn't know how I would get through it. And that was when my mom became terminally ill and what it felt like to lose her and how there were moments where, I'll be honest, I literally just wanted to die. That was nearly 19 years ago. It will be this coming November. And now on this side of it, what I can say to people and what I've been sharing is that, this too will pass. That part really is true and that we have to stay strong. And for me, what I'm telling people is what I had to learn was to have faith and continue to pray every day, even when things are good, because that really helps you when times become very troubling.
Right. And obviously these times are very troubling. And you can understand somebody having those kind of questions, but obviously having, the interaction with God, sure, but also with their church and their congregation. The fact that so many have moved to online, you see a lot of people posting, and in some ways, people who've moved away are now reconnecting with churches that they went to when they were younger. So there's sort of like, it's this added layer of comfort. Now, unfortunately, the headlines that you do see, look, we're talking today. Sunday was Palm Sunday. Next Sunday's Easter. So today we're talking, it's Maundy Thursday. Tomorrow's Good Friday.
Yes.
So this is obviously a time that is, it's a big red circle on your calendar. You have those people that, my mom used to always refer to them, because I grew up, we would go to a Lutheran church, and my mom would always complain about what she called the C and Eers, the people that only showed up on Christmas and Easter,
Yes.
and, so obviously there are a lot of people who want to be able to go. And I think so many people are being so responsible, but you do hear those stories of just across the country. You hear of pastors and other preachers and things that are having their congregation, they're having the church open, and some of them are trying to keep them 6 feet apart. But I just find that to be so, to me, I find it to be irresponsible, because obviously there's so many other ways to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then sort of, it's kind of a similar question to the first one. So if somebody is part of a church that's doing that, I feel like there's so many that are online, why don't you just, worry about your friends? And, there's any church that I've ever been to, there's so many, older people who are so happy to be there, and they're the most at risk. So if there's anybody that should be staying home, it's them. So I don't know. I just feel like it's important to sort of reiterate that idea.
Yes.
That,
Yes,
there's
I agree
ways
with you.
to have your conversation with God, with your congregation. You don't need to go anywhere to be there, even on Easter.
And that is absolutely right. And, with our church, our pastor, he started 3 weeks ago. I want to say this coming Sunday, I believe, will be our fourth service. And so, he is utilizing Zoom even to meet with us on other days of the week for Bible study, just to kind of have a get together and update on Saturdays. He's doing Facebook Live, YouTube, and Instagram TV for Sunday service. And so I think what we have to remember is that the building is not as important as it is our faith in God. And so we are the church. We're supposed to be the church. We can pray and worship God anywhere, even in our own homes. And we can do that collectively because of the technology that we have today. But I think we have a responsibility to keep each other safe and to keep each other as healthy as we possibly can. And I, know that some people would argue with me, especially from the Christian community, but I see it as a level of irresponsibility when you say that, as well as defiance even. Yeah. And so, just to say that I'm going to keep my church open and I'm still going to hold service because God is going to take care of me or God is going to heal me. Well, God absolutely will do every bit of that, but he has also given us common sense. And I think this is a time that we need to use it.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is sort of what you're talking about. Like, no one's going to tell me that I can't open up on Easter. So,
yes.
Well, I appreciate you talking about all that stuff. Obviously, we're here to talk about the book, and I'm going to make sure I get it right this time. The Woman God Created You to Be: Finding Success Through Faith, Spiritually, Professionally, Personally and Professionally. See, I still got it wrong. Yes. But The Woman God Created You to Be, that's the big title. Yeah. And one of these times I'll get the rest of it. So talk about the concept of the book, and the little bit that I'm understanding from it is that you came to this realization at some point that you weren't being the real woman that God created you to be.
Mm-hmm. And that is correct. And so, my career spans back more than 2 decades. So I have written 27 novels. So the idea of even writing a nonfiction book was not something I ever wanted to do, never aspired to do it. And to be honest, was a little bit fearful of doing it because fiction is what I knew. And that's what I've done year after year, and even created a series that, of course, centered around the church and around a pastor, but a very wayward pastor, one that was very flawed. And so over these last 3 years, though, it just was in my heart. And I knew that God had placed it in my heart to write about real life issues, but in a non-fictional format. And so this idea of the book, it made me really reflect in my spiritual life, my personal life, and in my professional life. Some things that I did do well, but many things that I didn't do so well, and things that I had to learn to do better, and in areas of my life where I needed to grow. And so that's the reason I wrote the book in 3 sections. Those first 6 chapters are about the spiritual you. The next set of chapters is about the personal you, and then the professional you, because I believe that in order to be okay personally and professionally, you first need to be okay spiritually. And then, of course, when you start talking about your professional life and your purpose, even that God has given you, you need to be okay personally as well. And of course, I certainly wanted to focus on something that I didn't focus on many years ago, and that is to know that what we do every day, even if it is how we earn our living, that it really, really is important to make sure that that coincides with our purpose, because that's how we are able to serve others. And really, in the end, that's what becomes the most important thing.
Yeah, and reading up on the book, it's sort of, there's this very succinct way that I think you summarize it, which I think is a great jumping off point. You know, there's this idea for what appears to be happiness, you know, having success and all these things. But then when you sort of scratch beneath the surface, what is much more important is what is actually happiness. And you're saying that that's the strong faith in God that you have, right?
And absolutely it is. And, you know, for so many years, even from the time I was in high school, my goal was, you know, how do I find a career that will allow me to earn as much money as possible? You know, that was my young mind. And, you know, you're a little bit naive during those years. You don't necessarily listen to adults. I had many adults, especially my teachers, saying, you have a gift for writing, you have a gift for storytelling, but I never paid a whole lot of attention to that. And, you know, moving forward, worked in corporate America, worked for state government, worked for city government, never really felt like I was coming full circle. I always felt like there was this void, so to speak. And so my mind was just on my everyday living and living a good life. But, you know, fast forwarding to today, I realize now that it really can't be about just you, you know, and your own wants and needs, that we really have an obligation to worry about others. And if God has given us certain gifts and talents and abilities, then he has given those things to us so that we can help people move forward.
Right. And I know that you talk about some of your own personal flaws and failures. One of the things that I know that you highlight in the book is sort of the challenges of having a divorce earlier in life. And then now you've been married to your soulmate, I believe, 29 years. So obviously, I think that's an interesting parallel to, you know, sort of any path you're on, whether it's professionally, spiritually, personally. Talk a little bit about how that factors into the book.
Yeah, so it does. So I talk about the idea of meeting your soulmate, finding your soulmate. And so I start off the chapter saying, you know, even having gone through divorce, that doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make my former spouse a bad person. It just means that we weren't necessarily meant to be together in that way. And so what I learned from that experience was what not to do and what to expect moving forward. And so I'm just a believer that everything does happen for a reason. I know that's cliche and we hear it all the time, but for everything that we go through, if it ends up being an obstacle, if we deal with trials or tribulation or a certain amount of pain, that allows us to become stronger in that next phase of our lifetime. And so that's what happened for me. The same with my husband. He was married before as well, but moving forward, we were able to come together in a much different way.
Yeah, and I think that obviously, you know, when there's any sort of pain or stress in your life, that, you know, it can make it that much more difficult for the other areas. You know, when I was much younger, let's say I was probably about 4. Unfortunately, I had a little brother that passed away. He was about 4 months old, and that was obviously, I was far too small to really grasp it. But my parents were very upset during that time, and they found actually that the church we were going to, you know, they really wanted to talk to the pastor, and just sort of, he wasn't really there for them. So for a little while, we went to just a completely different kind of church. And, you know, I know that so many of these things that, like we were saying before, it is comforting, but, you know, I guess, what would you say to someone who, you know, maybe not even exact that situation, but sometimes maybe the church that you thought was a good fit for you, you're like, this isn't helping me in this moment of need for whatever reason.
Yes. And so I think it's okay to, you know, take a step back, you know, take a look at your church as a whole, take a look at the ministry itself, and certainly take a look at your pastor. Pastors are human beings. They're flawed. They make mistakes. They fall short the same as each of us do. But at the same time, I am a believer that when you are a pastor of a church, you are the leader, you're leading lots of different people. And if you say that God has called you into this particular ministry, there's just a certain way that I think you should be handling your leadership position. And it's a certain way that you should be there for your members and helping them in the things that you say, and certainly in the things that you move forward with doing. And so my husband and I, we found ourselves in that situation for a different reason than what you and your family went through. But when you realize, okay, I'm not necessarily getting what I believe I need. I want to grow in God, and I want to grow. I want to learn more about the word, and I want to have a pastor who has a certain amount of integrity and one who cares about his family as well as the church congregation. And so 7 years ago, my husband began to seek that out. And so we found that in our pastor that we have today. And so I think it's okay to find what it is you need, especially in certain trying times in your life.
Right. One of the other things I know you address in the book is anxiety, and sort of to bring it back to the present day. These are incredibly anxious times. I mean, I've probably had 2 panic attacks in my entire life, and one of them was whatever, I guess like the 15th of March. It's sort of that first day when you're like, oh, we're all home, the kids aren't going to school. Yeah. And I made the mistake of, watching the news before bed. And then, of course, I couldn't sleep. And then, as irrational as it is, like, oh, I'm short of breath, and I'm like, I must have this. I must have the coronavirus. And then it spirals out of control. And it's so hard sometimes to get past that. And I consider myself not to usually be particularly anxious, but it just reminded me of like, this sort of a time. It's happening to everyone. I mean, I can even, my son's 4 and my daughter's 2. And now that we're like in the 4th week, you can sort of see they're definitely a little different. I mean, we were able to go outside for walks, but they know things are different. They're not upset, but they just sort of know. And, it'll be little things like my son asking, hey, because every year in the town we live in, there's always a big Easter egg hunt. So he's like, oh, when are we going to the Easter egg hunt? I'm like, oh, we're going to do it at our house this year. And just littler things like, oh, we should go to this restaurant that we usually go to on Fridays. Like, well, how about we get it, we'll have it here at the house. So all this, you're dealing with, just the regular day-to-day pressures. Just emotionally, it's so much. But talk about how you address the issue of anxiety in this book.
I do. So I have struggled with it since 2014. So, 6 years now. And it sort of, I guess on the one hand, I'll say it sort of came out of nowhere. But on the other hand, I believe I kind of pushed myself into that particular situation and started dealing with it because I was so overwhelmed. I was working way too much, way too many hours. I was writing 2 books a year. I was traveling on national tours for both those books. And then usually I'd already be thinking about or writing that 3rd book, finishing up one, still promoting one, and then out on the road with one. And so it really caught up with me. And I ended up in the emergency room and couldn't breathe when I arrived. My resting heart rate lying back on the gurney was still 120, and my blood pressure was high. And so the doctor, when he came in, he said, I'm testing for 2 things, either congestive heart failure or, pulmonary embolism. He pretty much knew for sure that it had to be one or the other, because they eventually even had to give me oxygen, and I just had all of the symptoms. I presented with all of it. Long story short, he came back, and when all the test results had come back in, and he said to my husband and I, thankfully you don't have either of them, but I am going to have to ask you, what is it that you're doing to come in here with these vital signs and presenting this way? Because whatever it is, you need to change it. And so that's when I realized it. So, I mean, even today, I find myself having to take deep breaths, and, that anxiety, the feeling of it will come on me. It's just this overwhelming feeling of nervousness. And then I'll start to project and worry about things that I really have no need to worry about. And the next thing you know, it is kind of veering into panic attack mode. And so, I am literally having to meditate and be more prayerful. I will wake up in the middle of the night and just feel overwhelmed, and I'll feel the anxiety just coming on more and more. And I literally just have to start praying. I mean, literally at that moment. and then I'll just eventually kind of drop back off to sleep. But this situation, this pandemic, I was doing much better with it before this came about.
Yeah. And I mean, it's sort of the, there of all the things that we prepare for, I mean, I live in Southern California. We're always prepared for an earthquake. And, growing up in New York State, we're always like, big snowstorms. Obviously people, there's hurricanes. This is something that like, happens in a movie and you're like, well, that's crazy, and fortunately, it does seem to be, at least from indications from other parts of the world, it seems like, yeah, it's a rough 2-3 months and you still have to be very careful after that. But you're starting to see at least places where it can give you a glimmer of hope, that you're like, I mean, you can still be hopeful for your own life, but just the idea that we can go outside and, walk around, and whether it's, take the kids to the park, be able to go to church. Maybe it's in the way where people are spread out a lot more than they usually sat,
Right.
and all of those sort of things. And yeah, but when you start to think about it, and that's why I try not to watch the news before bed, and definitely not first thing in the morning. Cause I'm like, let this be the good part of the day,
Yes.
before. Yeah, go ahead.
I discovered, I mean to cut you off, but I discovered that about a week ago. It was one of the first days that I got up and said, no Good Morning America, no Today Show, no CBS This Morning. And I literally had a great day and just a calm, peaceful day, a happy day. And I got more work done than I had gotten all this began. And that's when I realized, so even as much as this morning, my husband and I, when we woke up, the first thing he said was, he's like, I usually will put the remote on my nightstand, or he will, just depending on which one of us, hasn't fallen asleep yet at night. Sure. And so he's like, it's almost 7. It's like, let's turn on. And I was like, no, please. I said, I just can't. I cannot start my day, with that, because I realize what it does to me. I would rather start almost an hour in, where now they're talking about human interest stories, or, you get a chance to see the people who have recovered from the virus and they're heading home, the really feel good stories. And that's what I need. So I cannot watch the news, CNN, any of that. I can't watch that as often as I used to.
Yeah, it's a lot of like, even reading, headlines on a website can be horrifying in its own way, but then it's at least you're sort of like parceling out what you get. And, it seems like it's false advertising to call that show Good Morning America right now, because it should just be morning, because it's not particularly a good morning, but I know what you mean too. It's sort of like those shows, after they get the news out of the way, it's a little like, all right, so you're stuck in the house. Here's a recipe for things that you have that you maybe wouldn't have thought of. And that stuff can sometimes be calming. Having 2 small kids, we never have the news on the TV, just because we've tried to explain it to them in the way that a 4-year-old and 2-year-old can understand it, but you don't want the sort of questions that, might come up. You don't want them to hear anything scary that they don't need.
No.
So, and it's a lot of being able to, look, I could watch CNN on my phone if I need to,
Yes.
So,
I want to be aware.
Absolutely.
I want to keep abreast, but I definitely had to come to that understanding that I can't watch this all day long. I mean, I just had to take a step away from it, and things are much better for me now that I made that decision.
Yeah, my sister-in-law, my wife's sister, she was saying that she has it on all day in the background, and I'm like, but why? We were talking. We had like a Zoom family dinner on a Friday night, and it was just like, but why are you doing that? Are you getting new information throughout the whole day? It's like, if somebody feels like they need to be plugged in, it's like, in the morning, maybe after lunch, and then maybe before dinner, but never before bed. I always stress that to everyone, it's just, there's nothing good that comes out of you checking it right before bed.
No, I agree. And so, I start out my mornings, I normally pray every day anyway, in the morning and again at night. And so every single day, my prayer is for everyone worldwide, for those who have contracted it, praying for them to be completely healed, that they don't lose their lives. And for those of us who have not contracted it, I'm praying that we don't. And so, that's the most that I focus on. That's what I have to focus on.
Right. No, exactly. And it's, obviously the media focuses on, the numbers are important so that we understand it. But I like when you see the stories, like I saw a headline, I think yesterday, that 300,000 people have recovered from it.
Yes.
I'm
I
like,
saw that.
let's
Mhm.
put that in all the stories about how many
Yes.
people have been infected and died. Just make sure, like, oh, but also keep this in mind too.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
And I was going to say, well, and the other part, so I am happy though that they do
Yeah,
keep it, in the forefront. So we're aware, because unfortunately we still have so many people that
yeah,
will not abide by the shelter in place order. I mean, they don't believe in it. They don't want to be confined. They still want to go to the barber shop. They still want to get their hair done. They still want to do things that are not essential. These are things that
yeah,
are just not necessary. And then when you start to hear about people passing away, and it's because they would not stay at home.
yeah.
Those stories kind of need to be out there, because maybe it will, bring awareness to people and get them to understand just how important this is.
Right. No, I absolutely. And I think the media has a very important role, but this is sort of the other side of how great it is, the technology we have. I think we're able to be inundated by, not just bad news, but just like horrific, depressing news. So
Yeah,
it's good to sort of space that out.
it is.
Let's take it back to the book, because I do want to get into a little bit more of this. You say that the book actually walks the reader through a few different ways to do it. One is to become the best spiritual you, and it says in parentheses 7 days per week. So talk about how that's not just the 1 day a week, not just Sunday, but how to sort of focus on that aspect of it.
Yes. So I have I talk about that chapter. That's number one, and then my second chapter talks about church people as well. And so I kind of visit the whole idea of realizing that being in church on Sunday, that's not the only day that we need to be focused, and that we need to be focused on our spiritual lives. And so we need to do the right thing. We need to treat people the way we want to be treated 7 days per week. We need to live our lives in a godly way. If we say that we are Christians, then that needs to be throughout every single day, whether we are at home, whether we are at work, whether we're communicating with people online, whatever that might be. That, again, we need to become the church, if we aren't already. And so, just doing the right thing, and not just on Sunday. And growing up, I've been in church my entire life. Sometimes I would see, one thing on Sunday, and then you might see a person on Tuesday or Wednesday, and it's like, whoa, I didn't really expect that from you. You're kind of a different person outside of the church. And so, all of us, I'm sure, have been guilty of that at some point in our lives. And so that's why I talk about, doing the right thing, 7 days per week.
Right. And obviously, if you do that, that sort of feeds into a couple of the other things, which leads to being the best personal you. And if you're the best personal you, something we were sort of touching on before, that then feeds into the best professional you. And then, in terms of your relationships, whether it's, romantic or as a parent, any of that. So talk a little
Yeah.
bit how it all sort of works together.
Yes. So, if you're working on your personal life, and I even have a couple of chapters. One is talking about working on the physical you, even, being healthy, getting the exercise that we need. Sometimes we can become lax with that. And I know that from personal experience. But if you're healthy, then you're going to be a lot better. You'll be able to present yourself better and help people better in your professional life. When I talk about the emotional side of ourselves, and how we can suffer silently. Sometimes people will be dealing with all kinds of mental and emotional illness and refuse to get the help that they need. Again, I am a person who has very strong faith in God. That is everything. It means everything to me. But I also believe that God has given gifts and the knowledge to professionals, counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists. And so, if you're dealing with something, even if it's something, called anxiety, if you're dealing with depression, you need to make sure those things are intact as well, once again, in order to do well professionally. So it all ties in together.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that it is one of the, sometimes these things can be boiled down into, sort of almost trite cliches, but sometimes they're for a reason. It's like, you're not going to love anybody until you can love yourself. And,
Yeah.
this would all be a big part of that. I wanted to, before we wind things down, I wanted to talk a little bit. So you talked about how you've been writing for about 25 years, it sounds like, but
Mhm.
it started out that it was on the side because, you had gone into the corporate world. Talk about how your first book, you actually decided to self-publish it. I assume that was not what your choice was. I'm going to guess that that's because you tried to shop it around. So talk a little bit about that process and sort of the satisfaction of actually publishing your own book.
Yes. So I started writing in 1995 and, sat down. It was my first novel. I was still working full time for city government. And I would come home every evening and write. I wrote every weekend, holiday, kind of fast forwarding. 7 months later, my book was complete. And during that time of writing, I had also learned that publishers really want you to have a literary agent versus you're submitting your manuscript to them directly. They didn't want to receive what they called unsolicited manuscripts. So I compiled a listing of literary agents and sent out query letters. In some cases, I included several chapters as well, so they could get an idea of what I had written. And I always shared that I was a bit naive in that process because I thought surely, they're all going to be interested in representing me. But what happened was I received a rejection letter from every single one of them. I started out with a list of 14, and that's when the rude awakening happened. And so then, because I couldn't find a literary agent, I thought, well, I don't have anything to lose, so I am going to submit my query letters and the manuscript to editors at the major publishing houses. And once again, I was rejected. And so at that point, I was really ready to give up. My mom heard me saying that, and she said, I don't know anything about publishing, but we passed around copies of your manuscript to folks here locally, and they're saying they kept reading it. They didn't want to put it down. And she said, I think that means something. But that was my mom. So, my mom had always, told me that I could do anything for the most part. And I didn't know that she would necessarily tell me if the book was awful. And so I heard what she said and I was grateful, but I thought, no, I'm giving this up. And I started applying to MBA programs. And was accepted to 2 of them, decided on which one I was going to attend. That's when she knew I really was giving up on the book, and so did my husband. And so finally he said to me, you have this background in business. Why can't you just start your own company and publish the book yourself? And that's how this whole idea of self-publishing came about. I purchased books on that and read them, started my own company in June of 1996. That first 3,000 copies of the books came to our house in September of that year. We had an opening reception, and the book ended up doing very well. And so starting this business and creating this marketing plan, and at that time, we had way more independent bookstores in the country. And
Sure,
so
yeah.
I contacted them, and so they really were very, very helpful in that process. There was one woman, her name is Emma Rogers, and Miss Emma owned a store called Black Images in Dallas, Texas. And she literally contacted other booksellers in the country and said, hey, we need to get behind this book and this author. And one thing led to another. Next thing you know, readers were buying the book, and then they were sharing that information with their friends and family members. And so from there, I was able to take those sales numbers back to literary agents. And I found one who offered to represent me. That was in February of 97. So it was just a few months after I first released the book. She sold it to a major New York publisher, and I had been published with New York publishing houses ever since then. First Kensington Publishing, then HarperCollins, and then Hachette Book Group with the Grand Central Publishing imprint. Now, fast forwarding to my very first nonfiction book, my plan was to submit it to my publisher as well. But as I kept writing that, and I just kept staying prayerful about what I really believed God wanted me to do, I made the decision to go back and utilize my company again. And I self-published this book as well, The Woman God Created You to Be. And it has been the best journey. It ended up being my most fearful journey in the beginning to ultimately becoming my most enjoyable writing experience ever.
And yeah, I liked sort of, because I was seeing that in the notes that this was also self-published. So I love that it sort of comes full circle to right now. Now, at what point, how many books in did you start to go, okay, I don't need the day job anymore? Were you ever maybe a little hesitant, like, yeah, this book did well, but what if they don't like the second, third, or fourth one? So did you hang
Right.
on to the day job for a little longer than maybe in hindsight you think you should have?
Well, no, I definitely would have, because I tell everybody when it comes to my husband and me, I am not the risk taker in the household. I mean,
Sure.
I believe in God and I believe in myself and I believe in what I'm working on. But the idea of quitting and, walking away from my full-time job, that was never to me a consideration. I just never would have thought to do anything that way. But after we had our opening reception here, about 500 people came out, and it did not hurt that I worked for city government. So I saw the mayor, at City Hall on most days, and our legal director. I used to work with him because I worked for community development, and worked on housing and helping first time home buyers, low to moderate income home buyers, get into their first homes. And so our legal director, he would review my contracts. He went on to become one of our state assemblymen. So both of them agreed to attend my opening reception. So when I submitted that information in the press release to our local media, that got all of them on board. And, talk about not knowing, what the plan is for your life when, here I was working for the city, never knew, the blessing that our mayor at that time and our state assemblyman would become to me. But that night we were at home, and my husband, had another big bright idea. It was his idea for me to start my business and self-publish it. But he said to me, so, when you go back to work this week, you're going to have to give your 2-week notice. And I thought, oh my God, he's really lost his mind this time, he can't be serious. And
Yeah.
but, I appreciate the support and all of that, but, this is going a bit far. And so he said to me, I know, that worries you. You're afraid to do it. And yes, we will only have one income, but, we'll be able to pay our bills. We won't have money to just kind of throw away. We won't be able to do things that we don't need to do anymore. Some of the things that we want to do, we'll have to bypass. But if you don't give this 100% of your time, I don't think you're going to be successful with it. And so I did go to work. I went back to work. We had taken the party actually was that Sunday. We had taken a vacation day on Monday, and I went back to work on Tuesday, and I gave my 2-week notice. And so I have been a full-time writer since November 1996. And so I've never regretted it.
Right.
And he was right. I was able to put all of my time toward that. And that really, I believe, made the difference.
No, absolutely. I think that it's great that you were able to, you had the luxury of, another income so you could focus on it.
Mm-hmm.
Our guest is Kimberla Lawson Roby, and you have the website. I think it's very smart. It's just Kim Roby, Kimroby,
Yes,
because obviously the whole name would be like, wait, where's that go? Where's this go? So
that's
that's
right.
great. And before, sort of my last question for you, you've talked a little bit about how you do a lot of these speaking engagements,
Mm-hmm.
on a variety of topics. And I'm just sort of wondering what seemed to be, it doesn't have to be the number one, but what are things that seem to come up more often than not? The things that somebody coming out to hear you speak is most interested, whether, they want to tell you, what their books meant to them, or what seem to be the concerns that most, and I'm going to assume predominantly women, but most people in America are bringing to you when you're speaking at these events?
Yes. So, of course, usually there's going to be not just one person, but several people who are in the audience who are interested in writing. They may have already written a book, or they're just wanting to know, how do I get it published? Or if I'm not able to find a publisher that will offer me a book deal, how do I self-publish it? So that topic always comes up. But for the most part as well, questions will come up about real life social issues. And so because I wrote fiction, but I not only wrote fiction, I always centered every single book on real life social issues. It was just kind of, I think, a smooth transition into writing this nonfiction book, and also having it coincide with many of the speaking engagements that I've done now for many, many years. But, I will have women ask me questions, similar to what you brought up earlier. It's like, so, what was it like to, be in a marriage and get divorced? And, what is it like now? What's different about this particular marriage? You lost your mom. How did you get through that? How are you able to find joy and happiness again and move on without your parent or your spouse, or in some cases, people have sadly lost their children. And so all sorts of things will come up, friendship. What happens when, women may have been friends for years and then there's this falling out, so to speak. And, maybe, what do I do to get that friendship back? Or what do I do just to be able to forgive and move on from it? So all sorts of questions come up, and pretty much they're about everyday life. And they center on things that most of us have either already gone through or we will likely go through in the future.
Well, the book again, Kimberla Lawson Roby's book, The Woman God Created You to Be, Finding Success Through Faith, Spiritually, Professionally, Personally and Professionally. Just one day I'll keep practicing it personally and professionally. I want to put the profession before personally, but see, that's the problem right there. That's why I need to read the book in its entirety so that I know I can't get to the professionally if I don't put the personally first.
That's right.
In any case, it's been delightful to talk to you. It's always nice to, have an opportunity like this to meet someone new and, get to have a very calming, relaxing, hopeful, spiritual conversation. I think it's something that we could all use. And I hope that people look for the book. As I said, Kim Roby, KIMROBY, to find out more about it. And, look, I understand people maybe aren't ordering as many like physical books to come in packages, but obviously, every book out there you can get on a Kindle or read it on your laptop. So
Yes.
I hope that people take the time to find a way that they're comfortable reading. But Kimberla, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I really appreciated the conversation.
Oh, thank you, Christian. I so appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Let's
see.
I will stop the recording.